This podcast episode is for investor education purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment advice. Consult your personal investment advisor before engaging in any securities transaction.
Ever since the Secure Act was passed at the end of 2019, if you pass away and pass along an IRA since the year 2020 forward and your beneficiary is not your spouse, then your IRA beneficiary will have 10 years to work with to get that account fully distributed out. And by distributed out, I mean your beneficiary is going to have 10 tax years to get all the money out of your inherited IRA, pay taxes on those distributions, and decide what to do with all the after-tax proceeds. Your beneficiary's got 10 years. Or do they? I would argue that with a little bit of pre-planning, you might have more of a choice in the matter as the IRA account owner than you otherwise might have thought. So that's the topic for today. Today's July 18th Wise Investor Show, I'm going to be discussing some of the workarounds to that 10-year required distribution rule for inherited IRAs as stipulated by the Secure Act. Hello, and thank you for making this Wise Investor Show podcast part of your day. I'm Greg Smith, Senior Financial Planner with the Wise Investor Group, a 20-person team out of Reston, Virginia, including our two college interns, Rothstein and Henry. And we specialize in working with people just like you to identify what it is you've been working, saving, and investing toward. And we'll put you on the path to accomplish what it is you're after, both financial and otherwise. That's what we do. We help you identify what it is you want, establish the plan to get you there, and review and update it regularly so you always know where you stand relative to what you want. If you're a client of ours and you happen to have any questions about this show topic and how it might pertain to you, please call me anytime at 571-430-7200. And if you're not yet a client of our Wise Investor Group team, well then please reach out at the same number, 571-430-7200, and we'll look forward to seeing how we can help you and your family. And I also should mention that before I begin the discussion about some of the workarounds to the 10-year required distribution rule for inherited IRAs, you're going to want to check all this out with your financial planner, your tax advisor, and or your attorney before implementing anything I talk about today. And with that, let's get to it. The 10-year distribution rule for inherited IRAs may not be as hard and fast as you might think. At least, it's not if you consider that there are some pre-planning and post-planning ideas that I have for you today to consider. And the reason I bring this up is that typically, by the time an IRA gets inherited, it gets inherited by someone who's already working and earning and may not necessarily need the extra income that the IRA distributions generate, and that it only adds extra income to the front page of your 1040. Which means that your taxes go up and that you might be in the position of having to pay more for your Medicare Part B premiums than you otherwise would have had to as a result of IRMA, the income-related means adjustments, the means testing going on for Medicare, whereby as your income increases, so too might your Medicare Parts B and D premiums. Of course, the easiest and simplest solution is to talk with your financial planner and place the distributions within the context of your overall financial plan and determine how best to use those 10 calendar years that you have to work with, or really those 10 tax years that you have to work with, to determine how best to spread out the distributions over the course of that 10-year period. Because you're going to want to seek to pay at the lowest brackets for the longest period of time. I've seen night and day differences where taking out the mere minimums for the first 9 years results in a huge spike of income in the 10th year, where a lot of it is lost to the IRS at the highest brackets, when tens or sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars could have been saved by simply establishing a strategy for determining how much to distribute out year by year. So if you find yourself subject to the 10-year distribution requirement, that approach, meeting with your financial planner to determine how best to make use of the 10 years that you have to work with, that approach is the minimum that you would need to do. And of course, I would recommend consulting with your qualified tax planner or your financial planner on that. I think it's important to know that there are exceptions to the 10-year distribution requirement. Well, first, all it takes is for the beneficiary of your IRA to be what's known as an eligible designated beneficiary. And these eligible designated beneficiaries are able to avoid that 10-year distribution requirement. And instead, what they're able to do is enjoy a lifetime of IRA distributions spread out over many, many more years. In order to have your IRA still in the position to avoid that 10-year distribution obligation, you can pay attention to who the beneficiaries are. If your beneficiary is your surviving spouse, well, then there is no 10-year distribution requirement. If you pass, your IRA just transfers to your spouse as though it was theirs all along. Your surviving spouse can treat the inherited IRA as though it was theirs the entire time, which could then also reset the required minimum distribution schedule to a much more beneficial distribution amount if they're younger than you. The surviving spouse, or any beneficiary for that matter, always has the option as well to disclaim the IRA account into a trust or to the next in line, other beneficiaries, if it's suitable. If you have enough, and you know you have enough, and you'd rather someone else benefit, you can always disclaim the account and let it go to the next in line. A surviving spouse isn't subject to the 10-year distribution rule. Also, if your beneficiary is disabled or chronically ill, they too are eligible designated beneficiaries and are not subject to the 10-year rule. If your beneficiary is not more than 10 years younger than you, then they too are an eligible designated beneficiary and they can take distributions over their lifetime. So see, there are some exceptions to the rule. So this is important stuff for you to know. But what if you're feeling exceptionally sprightly and ambitious and you'd like additional workarounds to the 10-year distribution requirement for inherited IRAs? Well, here's another way. If you are the IRA account owner and your kids are in high-paying professions and you don't necessarily need your traditional IRA for your day-to-day living expenses, and you're able to look really long-term, I'm talking past your lifespan, then something to consider is starting to convert your IRA to the Roth. Doesn't have to be all at once, nor probably should it. You'll definitely want to get your tax preparer and financial planner involved with this. If you're paying at a significantly lower tax rate than the tax rates your kids are paying, then by discussing the Roth IRA conversion for some of your traditional IRA may serve to keep more of your money in your family and provide less to the IRS. With inherited Roth IRAs, yes, there is still that 10-year requirement for all of the funds to be completely distributed out of it. But the big difference, well, actually two big differences, are that there are no required minimum distributions along the way for inherited Roth IRAs, both for you and your Roth IRA as well as for your beneficiary. And at the same time, distributions taken out of it are completely tax-free to you and ultimately your beneficiary. So what this could mean for you and your family is that you convert some of your traditional IRA funds to the Roth, and yes, you'll pay taxes on the amount that you convert, but the idea is that you do it if you are paying at a lower tax rate than the rate that your kids pay. And as a result, your Roth IRAs can continue to grow undisturbed, tax-free, for the rest of your and your spouse's lives, and ultimately for an additional 10 years beyond that. And then once distributed out, Every dollar comes out tax-free to your kids. Doesn't impact their taxes, doesn't impact their IRMA, their Medicare Part B or D premiums if they were starting to get close to applying for Medicare. Where this works best, as I mentioned, is when you're paying at a tax rate that is lower than the tax rate that your kids pay. And by the way, if given the choice, inheritors would probably much rather inherit a Roth than a traditional IRA. Not that that should be an overriding factor in your decision-making by any stretch. So that's another idea. Consider whether or not Roth IRA conversions make sense, both for you in the present, as you do get something for the taxes that you pay on the conversion. You do get diversification of tax treatments. You also get additional insulation from future tax rate fluctuations, as you'll have more choice as to where to pull the funds from. And as you whack away at your traditional IRA account balances by converting some of it to the Roth, you also, whether you realize it or not, are reducing your future required minimum distributions going forward. See, required minimum distributions are balance-based. The larger your IRA account balance, the larger your required minimum distributions will be. And the larger your required minimum distributions are, the larger will be then the taxes that you'll pay. So Roth IRA conversions could help manage better the taxes that you could be paying in the future. All right. Well, would you believe that we've only started, that we've only just begun on these ideas? We have plenty more to go on potential workarounds to the mandatory 10-year distribution rule on inherited IRAs. These ones were just the low-hanging fruit. I've got additional heavy-hitter ideas for you coming up when I come back. You're listening to Greg Smith with the Wise Investor Group, and I'll be right back.
After a brief pullback, anything AI-related is back in the driver's seat. How should you think about historically high market concentration and performance concentration while still trying to diversify and manage risk? Tune in every week as we discuss the latest financial trends and what investors need to know. To filter out the noise and become a better informed, wise investor, listen to us at The Wise Investor Show at raymondjames.com/The Wise Investor Group. Or just find us on your favorite podcast app. Raymond James & Associates Incorporated, member New York Stock Exchange, SIPC.
The information contained in this podcast represents the opinions of the hosts and guests and does not necessarily represent the views of Raymond James & Associates, Inc., the Wise Investor Group, or their respective affiliates and employees. This podcast is for investor educational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment advice. The contents of this podcast do not purport to constitute a comprehensive summary of all information necessary to base an investment decision. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Securities mentioned in this podcast may not be suitable for all investors. Seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your individual situation. Discuss any tax or legal matters with the appropriate professional advisors. Raymond James & Associates, Inc., member New York Stock Exchange, SIPC.
Thank you, and welcome back to the Wise Investor Show. I'm Greg Smith, Senior Financial Planner and your host for today. Today's show topic is workarounds to the mandatory 10-year distribution rule for inherited IRAs. I wanted to talk about it today since it can be so costly to overlay large and condensed IRA distributions on top of earned income if the inheritor is still working and earning. Also, it's important to note that not every inheritor may be in the position to handle large slugs of cash coming their way without guardrails or guidance. Therefore, I think that this is an important topic to tackle. Well, I promised you heavy hitter ideas when I came back. Well, here's one. A huge workaround to the mandatory 10-year distribution rule on inherited IRAs involves a little additional pre-planning and meeting with your estate planning attorney to set up a charitable remainder trust and naming your charitable remainder trust as the primary beneficiary of your IRA, and then identifying who would otherwise be your IRA beneficiary or beneficiaries as the beneficiaries of your charitable remainder trust. The charitable remainder trust receives every dollar of the IRA account tax-free, as a properly structured charitable remainder trust is a tax-exempt entity. Now, someone will pay the taxes, sure, and that's going to be the income beneficiary of the charitable remainder trust. But the nifty part about this is that for those of us that miss being able to pass along a lifetime supply of income that an inherited IRA used to provide via what was known as the stretch IRA concept, this is a way to get back to stretching income from an IRA for life. With your attorney's help, you can set up a charitable remainder trust to ultimately benefit your favorite charity, but in the meantime, it'll pay out to your beneficiary for the rest of their lives if you wish. Effectively, this idea transforms what otherwise would have been a forced 10-year event of taxable distributions into a much more controlled, long-term income stream for those you wish to benefit longer than 10 years only. And I think it's a really nifty idea, and it's a way to stay in the memory, at least annually anyway, of those you care about the most while ultimately benefiting your favorite charity once your beneficiary passes. Things to consider when deciding if possibly naming a charitable remainder trust is a way to go for you is determining several things. Intensity of cash flow is one. With an inherited IRA, the intensity of cash flow is substantial. 10 years of distributions, and then the cash flow from it stops. With a charitable remainder trust, the cash flow is lessened and smoothed for a specified length of time or for life. You get to decide. And that's another factor, the longevity of payments to the beneficiary. With the inherited IRA, the longevity of distributions is limited to 10 years. And because of that, the risk of outliving the income to the beneficiary is much higher with inheriting an IRA outright than from receiving benefits from a charitable remainder trust, as the charitable remainder trust can be designed to pay the income beneficiary for their entire lifetime. Now, there are some trade-offs to be aware of. Inheriting an IRA outright does give the inheritor much more flexibility and optionality as to what to do with the after-tax proceeds once the funds have been distributed out. Those proceeds could and likely should be reinvested into something else that could be productive for the beneficiary for the longer term. But there's also no assurance that the inheritor will do so. And to give you a real-life and very simple example, side by side of pairing inheriting a $1 million IRA versus being the income beneficiary of a $1 million charitable remainder trust. Thought that might be useful, with both inheritors being in the same 35% tax bracket. For the $1 million IRA inheritor, they might take out $100,000 over the compressed 10-year time frame, resulting in 35%, $350,000 in taxes. $350,000 in taxes from $1 million leaves the beneficiary with $650,000 in after-tax money after 10 years. If the beneficiary, however, takes 5% a year out from a $1 million charitable remainder trust, they would receive $50,000 per year, not 100, but 50. So less income, but conceivably for much longer. Should the income beneficiary receive $50,000 a year for 25 years, also at the 35% bracket, they would ultimately be receiving not $50,000 a year, but after 35% taxes, it would be really $32,500 after tax. But the idea, though, is that it's for a much longer period of time than 10 years. After 25 years of income, the charitable remainder trust beneficiary will have distributed out not $1 million, but $1.25 million. And don't forget, that's 25 years worth of $50,000 a year, so the beneficiary will have enjoyed over $812,000 of after-tax income. That's more than the $650,000 that was left after the mandatory 10-year distribution schedule. So you know the break even just with these numbers is 20 years. So if you were to identify a charitable remainder trust as beneficiary of your IRA account, your beneficiary would need to receive income for at least 20 years to break even at the same after-tax income amount. Now, this is using very simple numbers and no growth on anything. It does get quite a bit more interesting if you apply a growth component to the IRA and to the charitable remainder trust distributions. When you factor in a growth rate, the break-even time shortens more to 15 to 17 years, with also a tidy sum left over for your favorite charity to boot. So certainly there are good, solid reasons for inheriting an IRA outright. The inheritor gets liquidity, control, higher early wealth, more choice as to how much to take out in a given year. And this approach does work best when the inheritor doesn't spend it all, reinvests the distributions into other long-term investments. And if your beneficiary is financially astute and is planning and future-oriented and is speaking with their financial planner regularly, well, then they would have a good idea as to how much of the distributions to spend and how much needs to be invested for their future. And if that's the case, well, then they likely are much better off receiving the IRA rather than being the income beneficiary of a charitable remainder trust. If, however, you'd rather set up an income stream for life for a beneficiary who may not be quite as astute with money, then this certainly is an idea worth exploring. You know your family best, and we'll be glad to help guide you through the decision-making process. And once again, you're welcome to reach out anytime at 571-430-7200. One last idea to share with you on ways around the 10-year required distribution schedule that I wanted to share with you. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't really affect the 10-year schedule, but it does affect how your beneficiary may receive the funds. And for this, you'll also need to get your estate planning attorney involved. And I'll give you a high-level idea of what it is you may wish to consider. So to work around having your beneficiary get income from IRA distributions outright, that's the key word, outright for 10 years, and that's it, with no guardrails, no guidance, no oversight, well, then you may want to consider the idea of getting with your estate planning attorney and creating a trust for your kids, whereby the trust gets named as the beneficiary of your IRA rather than the kids outright. And not just any trust, but a kind of trust that allows for distributions from IRAs to collect or accumulate within that trust. And from that trust, your kids may receive income and distributions as you set forth in the trust that you create. It's important to know that there are two types of trusts involved when it comes to trusts serving as IRA beneficiaries. One is the conduit trust. It's just like it sounds. The conduit trust shepherds the money out of the IRA directly to the beneficiary. And with the conduit trust, there really isn't a pit stop into any trust. The money just comes out of the IRA and it goes into the hands of the IRA's beneficiary. The idea for the trust I'm talking about here is what's referred to as an accumulation trust. Not a conduit trust, but an accumulation trust, which is a trust that can accept and retain the distributions from the IRA. And from there, will send out income or income and principal as you set forth in the trust document. It also may be a way to shelter those assets from creditors, from litigants, and keep the funds in your bloodline, which may be important to you. So that's another topic worth bringing up to your estate planning attorney the next time you meet. The IRA will still have to fully distribute out within 10 years, but if your situation calls for it, those distributions could build up within your accumulation trust that you set up, and there isn't necessarily a 10-year timeline on that. And by the way, as a public service announcement, if you already have a trust set up as beneficiary of your IRA account, and if it was set up prior to the Secure Act passing in 2019, well, you ought to have it reviewed with your estate planning attorney to make sure it still works well as a beneficiary of your IRA account and will do what it is you want it to do. You put in the time and the money and the cognitive effort to think about it and set up the trust. You might as well do what you intend for it to do for you and your family. Besides, it's wise to have your estate plan reviewed and updated whenever you wish to make a change, or if there's a change in your family or wishes, or every 5 to 7 years, whichever comes first. So if your estate plan was designed prior to the passage of the Secure Act, which happened at the end of 2019, well then you're due for an estate plan update with your attorney anyway. All right, well, since I'm still here at the mic and have a little bit more time, you get the bonus round. I've got some other ideas for you to contemplate when thinking about that mandatory 10-year distribution rule on inherited IRAs. Consider beneficiary planning. You might consider identifying your higher earner beneficiaries as beneficiaries on your Roth IRA and lower income beneficiaries as beneficiaries on your traditional IRA. That, too, may keep more of your money in your family as it serves to minimize the effects of taxation on the forced distributions. It's a little tough to even out and maintain equality, but the general idea here is to either work with accounts or beneficiary percentages on your various IRA accounts to have your family pay the least amount of tax necessary. If you don't necessarily need distributions from your IRA account and are insurable, you also could consider taking money out of your IRA account to pay for a life insurance policy on yourself. That's a strategy known as IRA Max, the IRA Max strategy. If you don't need your required minimum distributions for your day-to-day living expenses, what some people will do is see how much insurance they can buy on themselves for roughly what that required minimum distribution provides. The big advantage here is that, quite the opposite of IRA distributions, life insurance proceeds are income tax-free to your heirs. And the proceeds could be used to pay the taxes on those 10 years of distributions. Sometimes it's nice to get a little extra liquidity. And if an irrevocable life insurance trust, also known as an ILIT, owns the policy rather than you, well then all the better. The proceeds would be excluded from your gross estate for estate tax purposes as well. And then the irrevocable life insurance trust that receives the proceeds of your life insurance policy that you had the foresight to take out on yourself could then pay out your beneficiaries in a lump sum if you wish, or upon certain milestones, or provide income for life. You get to choose. We'll be glad to model that out for you as well, see if that's something that could make sense for you and your situation. So my goal for today was to give you some ideas of ways to work with or work around the 10-year distribution requirement for inherited IRAs. We talked about naming your spouse as beneficiary, as there is no 10-year forced distribution with a spouse inheriting your IRA, along with other eligible designated beneficiaries such as disabled adults, chronically ill adults, and any beneficiary that isn't more than 10 years younger than you, such as a sibling or a peer of similar age. They all qualify for the lifetime stretch. Another idea we talked about is weighing whether you or your kids pay at a higher rate of income tax, and if you pay at a lower rate of income tax, then you might consider Roth IRA conversions as a way to delay those forced annual distributions, at least for 10 years anyway, for your inheritors, while making the entire distribution from an inherited Roth IRA income tax-free for your beneficiary in the 10th year. We talked about setting up a charitable remainder trust to serve as your IRA's beneficiary and have the charitable remainder trust pay your beneficiary or beneficiaries for a lifetime, thereby circumventing the 10-year distribution requirement. And then we talked about working with your estate planning attorney and naming an accumulation trust, not a conduit trust, but an accumulation trust as the primary beneficiary of your IRA account so as to be able to receive funds from the IRA and then send out funds for as long as you'd like from it to your intended beneficiaries. And lastly, we talked about potentially using funds from your IRA, funds that you don't need from your required distribution, to fund a life insurance policy on you. And if you set up an irrevocable life insurance trust to own that insurance policy on you, well, then that life insurance benefit becomes an upfront, income tax-free and estate tax-free event that could provide an income stream for life for your beneficiaries, which may give you some flexibility on beneficiary planning for your IRA accounts, depending on the relative amounts of each. There are alternatives to having your beneficiaries forced to distribute out significant sums of fully taxable money and exhaust the account within 10 years. With a little bit of discussion and pre-planning, we can help you feel comfortable that you and your family are not only on the right path, but that your assets and accounts are as well. Well, I hope that this has been helpful, and if you have any questions, you're welcome to call me anytime at 571-430-7200, or you can always email me at gregory.s.smith@raymondjames.com. Coming up next week is my partner, Simon Hamilton, who will be hosting next Saturday's Wise Investor Show. And with that, it's been my pleasure to be here with you, and I thank you for making the time, and I wish you wise investing.
The information contained in this podcast represents the opinions of the hosts and guests and does not necessarily represent the views of Raymond James and Associates, Inc., the Wise Investor Group, or their respective affiliates and employees. This podcast is for investor educational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment advice. The contents of this podcast do not purport to constitute a comprehensive summary of all information necessary to base an investment decision. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Securities mentioned in this podcast may not be suitable for all investors. Seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your individual situation. Discuss any tax or legal matters with the appropriate professional advisors. Raymond James and Associates, Inc., member New York Stock Exchange, SIPC.